It's a beautiful day where last night I wrote the script at 12 a.m. in order to wake up early and film at 6 a.m. before I have to go to work today. So basically, why I'm making this video is because within my first 6 months of selling, I hold the company record for the fastest cold outbound sale, which is 4 days. So in this video, I want to talk more about how to sell to startups, um, and how to basically think like a VC in order to sell ahead of the curve. So, what the hell is a VC anyway? A VC is a venture capital, which is just a private equity firm that raises funds and gives funds to startups. So, sorry, they don't raise funds, they just give funds. Um, and so, when a startup is giving the opportunity for a VC to invest, there are rounds, and these rounds are pre-seed in chronological order: pre-seed, seed, series A, B, C, D, E, and so on, so on. So if you see a VC funding at a pre-seed round, it typically means that this is before the product is created and this is just the idea. And most of the time it's going if you see a startup getting a pre-seed round, it's not required at all, by the way. But if you see a startup having a pre-seed round, it's either a very difficult idea to do without capital, or the startup team is just cracked. Um, this may be the trend that you'll start seeing when you're like, okay, why is the X Frontier Labs model getting funding again? Like, I feel like Anthropic is a thing. I feel like OpenAI is a thing. But usually, if you like really dig deep, you'll see that the teams are like ex Anthropic or ex OpenAI, and they want to create their own division. Fun fact, actually, the people that founded Anthropic are ex OpenAI. And now, if you see, Anthropic has just raised a 65 billion Series H funding with a valuation of like 965 billion, while OpenAI is staying at like $852 billion valuation. So that shows you why people kind of like branch out and do their own thing. So now we know what a pre-seed is, but what's a seed? So seed is the most flexible. This is usually when a company has acquired a few customers, just needs like to strengthen and harden their pipelines to how they're gonna do GTM, product engineering. So this is something that comes after the pre-seed round. Again, not necessary. Okay, so now what are like these series? So there's series A, B, C, D, E. They go chronologically. So once you're at A, you have to move to B, and then B has to move to C, and it doesn't move like straight to D or something. And so this is mainly for growth. So the whole point of these series, A, B, C, D, E, is so that a startup can just grow. They have everything hardened, but now they just want to get money to make more money, essentially. Okay, so what happens to a startup when they go through these rounds? The company's leadership and founding team loses equity over time. So ideally, for a successful startup, a VC will want to be as early as possible because the equity options are a lot stronger in the beginning than in the series. And so, how does a VC make money? There are two terms you need to know: unrealized gains and realized gains. So, unrealized gains are potential paper profits that a VC can make. Realized gains are actual profits from the completed sale. So, let's take Brex, for example. Brex, before it was acquired by Capital One, which means bought, it was valued at $12.3 billion. Therefore, all of the VCs that invested in Brex and whatever they invested had unrealized gains that pooled to a potential $12.3 billion. However, when Brex was acquired by Capital One, it was acquired for $5.15 billion. So all the VCs had realized gains that actually pooled to $5 billion. So really, they only got paid based on that $5 billion valuation and not that $12.3 billion valuation. So it's a lot like stocks. If you see your stocks going up, but then you buy it at like a lower price, you don't get that up. You get it at the actual price you sold them for. Why this is important is because you need to understand the motivation for a startup to raise and what is a motivation for a VC to fund as well in order to snipe these at the exact time. So it's a common misconception that startups are just smaller businesses. Startups are aiming to be something entirely different from a business. A startup is like a financial asset to both the founding team and the VC. A startup will not stop at one funding round, okay? The goal is to get to as many funding rounds as possible before it does not make sense, and then to get acquired or IPO to cash in their earnings for both the founding team and the VC. I think a lot of people will look at a startup that is in pre-seed or seed and they will only have raised like about $1 million. And they will think that this is not a startup that you should reach out to. But actually there is a silver lining to this. So the silver lining is that a startup does not stop at pre-seed round, okay? The startup is now, after that pre-seed round, is on a ticking timer with all of their VCs to establish the roadmap to how they're going to get to that seed round. So when a VC invests money, they aren't just like, here, whoop-de-doo. Okay, the VC is like, okay, now what are you going to do with my money and how are you going to race to the next round? So there are benchmarks that the startup promises to fulfill before that next round in order to have that same VC participate in that next round. So if the startup does not meet those benchmarks, the startup will either risk losing that same VC to participate in their next round, or have that VC participate but have worser equity terms, aka lose more equity than they're supposed to. And when I mean they, I mean the founding team. Okay, so what does that roadmap usually look like? That roadmap is typically growing GTM, growing engineering, and growing product. If you are selling to anything that can help grow selling, engineering, or product, then you're in luck. You can sell to a startup. So now you know when you should be hitting up a startup, and that is right after a funding round, because after they raise, they are on a ticking timer. So if you'd like to be more specific with your searches and know who are the people you want to target at that startup and not spray and pray, whenever a startup raises money, they have a funding announcement. And in that funding announcement, they will describe the teams that they will be expanding, the projects they will be endeavoring in, or the goals that they have after the round and what they want to launch. So that's the perfect way to understand what a startup is going to be doing after that round. And it's like the most transparent way to know. Founding teams kind of have to be transparent about what they're going to build in order to attract more VC attention for the next round. How are you going to know when these startups even get funding? So there are plenty of VC funding sites that conglomerate data. There is Substacks that are written by GTM people, and there are news sources like X or Hacker News. So how I would suggest starting is, if I had just made a brand new X account, I would follow all of the VCs and look at their funding announcements that they retweet or tweet about, and then try to work backwards in order to find the people that are reposting that or commenting. You can also use AI to do this really, but you want to make sure that you have like a very expansive search for what these VCs are doing. Okay, so now we've talked about, like what to do after funding. But what if you want to get even earlier than that? What if you want to know what a startup is doing before they even get the funding? Check out open source projects. So open source projects are gems when it comes to tackling your fastest sales. And here is why. You have to understand why a startup would even want to do an open source project anyway. An open source project is a product that the startup has released where anyone can read the source code of, contribute to, and even use on their own device. And this is usually made through GitHub, like made available there. And so why would a startup that charges people for their product make their product open source. When you are using the open source model of a product, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the entire product. For features that they would want to keep exclusive, they can make those paid features. Big reason why people would make their product open source is because this is actually a GTM strategy disguised as an engineering initiative. So it's much easier to upsell users that are already using your free tier and move them to the paid tier. The engineers of that startup are actually more focused on customer facing features and product rather than having like sellers that like don't interact. Instead of like a heads down engineer who is just like building and building and building, they actually are a lot more product facing and care about what their users think about their product. When you have these type of engineers, they do usually care about more value propositions that relate to both engineering and GTM. So if your product is helping a product be better, as well as helping a product be correct or durable and stuff like that, you can mesh those and set it out to like engineers. So here's another technique, like it's kind of inspired by VCs. So if a company you're looking at, they have founders that are very active on X, or they can be reached via LinkedIn or email, you should be setting up coffee chats with those people. So this whole video is about how to think like a VC to sell ahead of the curve. What is better information than the actual founders that you would be selling to and knowing their direct opinions about the industry? So there are plenty of founders that do have like coffee chat links in their bio and ways to like talk to people for 15 minutes, just like booking on their calendar. And so if you have free time on your calendar and your workday, you should be taking these calls. It's a lot better than just like guessing where the industry is going. But I will say one thing, where you should not be taking these calls as sales calls. You should be taking these calls as an individual that's interested to learn. Founder is willing to talk to someone that books on their calendar if they just want to talk to cool people. So if you represent yourself as a cool person that wants to know their initiatives and mission and where they see that founder in the competition, you should take these calls alone and genuinely ask intelligently curious questions. That one is like pretty VC inspired. VCs take that all the time, just like going on calls with founders, and that's even like before they know if they want to invest. Like you have to have a vibe check call. So that's basically what you're doing, except you're not going to invest in them. You're just going to like sell in their industry. That is my advice, and it's time to go to work. So